often associated with its emotionally layered yet still sharply comedic tone, revolves around the WNYX team confronting the idea of change and absence in a way that feels both understated and deeply impactful. As the episode begins with what seems like an ordinary day at the station, but quickly takes on a different weight when the staff is forced to reckon with the lingering presence of someone who is no longer there, creating an atmosphere that is noticeably quieter, slightly off balance, and filled with small pauses that wouldn't normally exist in their fast-paced environment. And instead of addressing this absence directly in a heavy-handed way, the episode leans into subtlety, allowing each character to process it in their own distinct and often indirect manner, which results in a series of loosely connected moments that together form a cohesive emotional arc, with Dave Nelson trying to maintain normal operations as a way of coping, focusing on schedules, tasks, and structure as if keeping everything running smoothly will somehow prevent the emotional reality from fully setting in, but his attempts at normalcy come across as slightly forced, with occasional lapses where he seems distracted or unsure of what to do next, revealing that even his usual reliance on control cannot fully shield him from the situation, while Lisa Miller approaches the situation with a more introspective and emotionally aware perspective, recognizing that something is different even if it isn't explicitly acknowledged, and she makes quiet efforts to check in with others, offering support in subtle ways that reflect her growth as both a professional and a person, though she just struggles with how to navigate the unspoken tension, unsure of whether to address it directly or let it exist in the background. And Bill McNeil, perhaps surprisingly, exhibits one of the more complex reactions, oscillating between his usual self-centered humor and moments of genuine reflection, where he seems to grapple with the idea of how people are remembered and what impact they leave behind, occasionally sharing stories or observations that, while framed in his characteristic style, carry an undercurrent of sincerity that hints at a deeper emotional response. And Joe Garelli processes the situation in his own uniquely philosophical way, viewing absence not just as a loss, but as a shift in energy and presence, making cryptic comments about how people don't really disappear, but rather change form in how they are experienced by others, which both confuses and oddly comforts those around him, even if they don't fully understand what he means. And Matthew, as expected, struggles to process everything coherently, sensing that something is wrong, but lacking the emotional vocabulary to articulate it, leading him to ask awkward or overly direct questions that others try to deflect, creating moments of uncomfortable honesty that cut through the otherwise restrained tone of the episode, while Catherine Duke once again serves as a grounding presence, acknowledging the situation in a way that is neither overly sentimental nor dismissive, offering perspective that helps the others navigate their own reactions without forcing a particular emotional response. And as the episode unfolds, it becomes clear that its strength lies in how it balances humor with sincerity, allowing the characters to remain true to themselves while also exploring a more vulnerable side, with comedic moments arising not from ignoring the emotional context, but from how each character's personality shapes their way of dealing with it, such as Bill turning a reflective moment into an exaggerated anecdote, or Matthew misinterpreting a serious conversation in a way that inadvertently lightens the mood. And these moments prevent the episode from becoming overly heavy while still preserving its emotional core. And the narrative structure reflects this balance by avoiding a single central plot in favor of multiple smaller interactions that gradually build a sense of shared experience, with conversations overlapping, scenes flowing into one another, and a general feeling that time is moving differently, slower and more deliberate, as if the usual urgency of their work has been temporarily replaced by something more contemplative. And Dave, over the course of the episode, begins to shift from avoidance to acknowledgement, realizing that maintaining normalcy does not mean ignoring what has changed, but rather finding a way to incorporate it into their ongoing reality, a realization that leads to a subtle but meaningful moment where he allows space for reflection, whether through a pause in the broadcast, a change in tone, or simply a willingness to let the silence exist without immediately filling it. And Lisa supports this shift by helping create an environment where others feel comfortable expressing themselves, even if those expressions are imperfect or incomplete. While Joe continues to offer his abstract perspective, Bill navigates his own blend of humor and sincerity. Matthew gradually becomes more aware of the emotional context, and Catherine provides steady insight. And as these threads come together, the episode reaches a quiet resolution that does not attempt to tie everything up neatly, but instead emphasizes the idea that processing change and absence is an ongoing process rather than a single moment of closure. And the final scenes reflect this by returning to the familiar setting of the station, but with a slightly altered tone, where the characters resume their routines yet carry with them a deeper awareness of what those routines mean, suggesting that while the surface may appear unchanged, something fundamental has shifted beneath it, and this shift is captured in small details, such as a line delivered with a different inflection, a pause that lingers a little longer, or a glance that conveys unspoken understanding. And in this way, the episode manages to be both a continuation of the series' comedic identity and a departure into more reflective territory, demonstrating that even within a sitcom framework, there is room for nuanced exploration of complex emotions. And by the end, the WNYX team remains what they have always been: flawed, chaotic, and often ridiculous, but also slightly more connected, having shared an experience that, while not overtly dramatized, has nonetheless left a lasting impression on how they see each other and themselves, reinforcing the idea that the most meaningful changes are often the ones that unfold quietly, in the spaces between the jokes and the everyday moments that define their lives. And as the episode continues to stretch beyond its initial emotional framing, it deepens this exploration by showing how the absence that lingers in the station doesn't just exist as a shared atmosphere, but begins to subtly reshape the way each character interacts with their environment, almost like an invisible force nudging them into moments of reflection they would avoid. And this becomes especially apparent in how conversations unfold, because where there would normally be rapid-fire jokes and overlapping dialogue, there are now slightly longer pauses, moments where someone starts to say something and then stops or shifts tone mid-sentence, as if reconsidering how their words might land. And Dave, who has always relied on momentum to keep things running, finds himself increasingly aware of these pauses, unsure whether to fill them or let them sit, and in a rare departure from his usual instincts, he occasionally chooses the latter, allowing silence to exist in a way that feels almost foreign within the context of the show's typical rhythm. And Lisa notices this change and, rather than correcting it, leans into it, recognizing that these quiet spaces are not signs of dysfunction, but opportunities for genuine connection, even if they are uncomfortable. And her interactions with the others become more intentional, less reactive, as she takes the time to actually listen rather than immediately respond, which creates a subtle but meaningful shift in the group dynamic. While Bill continues to oscillate between deflection and sincerity, using humor as both a shield and a bridge, making jokes that on the surface seem self-serving or exaggerated, but occasionally revealing something more honest underneath, especially when he reflects on past moments in a way that suggests he is trying to understand his own place within the larger narrative of the group. And Joe, as always, processes everything through his own philosophical lens. But even his usually abstract observations take on a slightly more grounded tone, as if he too is affected by the collective mood, offering insights that, while still unconventional, resonate more clearly with the others. And Matthew's journey throughout this extended portion of the episode becomes particularly poignant, as he slowly begins to grasp the emotional undercurrents that have been present all along, moving from confusion to a tentative form of understanding. expressed in small actions rather than grand statements, like choosing not to interrupt a serious moment or offering help without being asked. And these seemingly minor changes highlight the episode's emphasis on growth as something that manifests in subtle, incremental ways rather than dramatic transformations, and Catherine continues to act as both observer and participant, stepping in at key moments with remarks that provide clarity without overshadowing the organic development of the others, reinforcing the idea that sometimes the most valuable contribution is simply recognizing what is happening and allowing it to unfold. And as these individual threads continue to intertwine, the episode builds toward a kind of emotional equilibrium, not by resolving the underlying absence or fully articulating its impact, but by showing how the characters adapt to it, integrating it into their shared reality in a way that feels authentic rather than forced. And this adaptation is reflected in the way they return to their work, not as a means of distraction, but as a continuation of their connection, with the station itself serving as both a backdrop and a unifying force that brings them together, even as they process things individually. And the humor that emerges in this latter half of the episode feels different as well, less about rapid punchlines and more about the natural absurdity of human behavior, the small contradictions and misunderstandings that arise when people try to navigate complex emotions without fully understanding them, creating moments that are funny not in spite of the emotional context, but because of it. And by the time the episode reaches its final stretch, there is a sense that something has quietly shifted within the group, not in a way that changes who they are fundamentally, but in a way that deepens their awareness of each other, making their interactions feel slightly more grounded, slightly more intentional, even as they return to their familiar patterns of chaos and humor, and the closing moments capture this balance perfectly. As the station resumes its usual energy, conversations overlapping, jokes flying, and the rhythm of the workplace reestablishing itself. Yet beneath it all there is an added layer of understanding, a shared acknowledgement of what has been experienced and what it means, even if it is never explicitly stated. And in this way, the episode extends beyond its immediate narrative to offer a reflection on how people deal with change and absence in real life. Not through grand gestures or clear resolutions, but through a series of small adjustments, moments of connection, and the gradual integration of new realities into existing routines, leaving the audience with a sense that while the world of WNYX continues to spin in its usual chaotic way, it does so with a slightly deeper emotional foundation, one that will continue to influence the characters in ways both seen and unseen as the series moves forward.